everybody. How you doing today? Welcome to today's training. Can anybody name the song in the background? Let me turn it up for you. Okay, you get 100 bonus points if you can name that song. Can anybody name it? And I'll tell you why I think it's important in just a second. But let's see if there's a comment. If anybody can name that song. All right, let me turn this off real quick. Enough of this madness. All right. Enough of the silliness, guys. Hey, how's everybody doing today? Welcome to today's training. I really appreciate you all showing up today to learn. I think the more you learn, the better you're going to be off in retirement. And there's just so much to search through on the internet that I think it's really good just to start breaking things down one by one, focus on the topics that you find most important, and then really just start there. And then from there, build your retirement plan on top of that. So for those that have never met me, my name is Jason J. Hamilton. I am a chartered retirement planning counselor and the founder of this group. Looks like a few more people are still logging in. For anybody that was on just a second ago, can you name that song and the artist? That would be really impressive to me. Oh, looks like Kevin got it. Don't Pull Your Love. And it's Hamilton Joe and Frank Reynolds. And Hamilton is actually Dan Hamilton. So that's technically my great uncle. So it's my grandpa's brother that had that song. So really great song. We played it at our wedding. I love the song. And, I want to start these trainings off a little bit more on a fun note while everyone's logging in. So hopefully you enjoyed that song. Great job, Kevin. You get 100 points. And these are imaginary points. I just made them up. But hopefully today you're here to learn more about how to create sustainable income streams in retirement. So starting last week, we've done this before, but for those of you that are new here, what I do sometimes is I'll put out a survey, and I'll just ask you a question. What are some things that you want to learn more about in retirement, right? And so I put that up a couple weeks ago, and last week we talked about taxation of Social Security because that was the number one question. I should say it was taxation of Social Security in relation to IRA/401k withdrawals. So we talked a lot about that last week. If you missed that training, it's still under the group announcements. If you are new here to this group, on the left side, if you're on a desktop, so if you're on your computer, on the left side, there'll be a lot of tabs. And I guess it would be left side there. A lot of tabs. And under there, you can find previous trainings. There's also a units section where I have put some things in there under different units. Right now, it could be a little more organized, but there's just so many things on the list that I need to get done that, we'll get there when we get there. But this group is really meant for you to ask questions, get answers. And really what I want you to do is learn about the things that I'm seeing retirees struggle with or have challenges with, I should say, on a regular basis. And then my goal is to help you bring some clarity around where you're probably at, what you may need to learn, and I'm going to give you some of the knowledge you need to help you get there. So today's training is on creating sustainable income streams in retirement, right? So this is the second question or second highest voted question on my last survey. But this is something that I think most people just really don't have a good, deep understanding of. And in general, people just think they're going to pull a certain percentage and it's all just going to work out 20 or 30 or even 40 years down the road. For some of you early retirees, I know there's a lot of folks that want to retire early in this group. So what I mean by early, before Medicare is available, before you qualify for Social Security. And I know there's a lot of folks that are teachers or government officials that have 20 or 25 years, so they qualify for a pension. And at 55 or 60, you could technically walk away. But then there's other subjects that come up like covering health care that you may not have, when the time Social Security withdrawals, and again, drawing from your assets, especially if you're before 59 and a half, where it's not just an easy, withdrawal from any of your retirement accounts. So today what I want to talk about is really helping you understand how to create sustainable income streams in retirement. So there's just no way for me to complete all of this information in one training. So this is what I call part one. Okay, we're going to cover at least it should be another 2 or 3 different sections around withdrawal strategies and creating sustainable income streams in retirement. But today, what we're going to talk about is the 4% rule. Okay, so can anybody say yes or give me a thumbs up if you've ever heard of the 4% rule? I'm pretty sure most people have. I'm going to pull up the training while you do that here. Let me switch over to my screen. And I just want to make sure that everybody can see this okay. So if you can see it okay, if you could please let me know, that would be great. I'm going to add my ugly face down in the corner here while we get this figured out. And I just want to make sure I'm coming through clearly, that you can see the training okay, that you can hear me okay. I'm getting a few thumbs up here, so that looks like it should be good. So for today's agenda, we're going to go through this training that I prepared, and then some of you have asked some really, really great questions. Some of them I may address in the training, so that'll be great, but some of them are not, because they're a little more specific, but we'll definitely dig into those questions. And again, I have to be real careful here that I'm not providing specific financial advice, because that does violate, the rules that I have to follow. But I want to give you the best information that I can to help you make good decisions. So got some really good stuff planned for you today. Quick announcement for those of you that are just hopping on. I'm taking my first vacation really in about 7 years. I took a honeymoon, so I don't call that a vacation. That was a honeymoon. That was separate. But I leave on Tuesday. We are going to Paris and then to Rome. So we have about 2 weeks of traveling through Europe. I've never been to Europe. It's going to be really amazing. If any of you have any tips or places to eat or activities to do that aren't like the mainstream type stuff that I can easily find by Googling, I would love for you to let me know some of the places I should check out while I'm in Paris and Rome. But without further ado, let's get into some of this training today. Where do we start? Creating sustainable income streams in retirement. There's a few different ways. Really, like if you want to break it down to the simplest format, there's really 4 ways to think about this, and we're going to cover all 4. And then you can also do a combination, right? You can also combine what I'm going to show you here over these next few trainings in a way that works for you. So we're going to separate them out and talk about those things in detail, okay? So hopefully there we go. So I need to show this to you. In no way, this is my disclosure information. This should not be taken as individual advice for you. This is not tax or accounting or legal advice. It's not anything like that. This is just for informational purposes so that you can increase your knowledge about retirement, and it is provided as is without warranties of any kind, express or implied. Okay, so we have to cover that. So let's talk about creating sustainable income strategies in retirement. Prior to retirement, in all honesty, I think the process of accumulating enough wealth is pretty simple, right? You live on less than you make, then you save and invest the difference, right? And then most of you, I would assume at this point, you understand what a 401k and an IRA, what they are. I'm not going to go into that. I think most folks here are a bit of a higher level of understanding, so you understand the basics of what that is. So pretty simple. Throughout your working career, or if you're still working, you probably sat down at some point and created a budget and said, okay, I need this much to live on. I have this much left over. I'm going to invest a certain percentage. And for most people, it's 10, 15, 20%. Or you just signed up for your 401k at work and you put in 10%, and then that money was taken away. You never saw it. And now you've accumulated a certain amount of funds that you hope will last you for the end of time. I know there's a lot of apprehension with funds lasting because, in all honesty, it could be very scary that if you think about it, if you worked from, say, 25 to 55 and you're retiring early, you work for 30 years and you are going to live to 85 or 95. In that 30 years, now you've saved enough to potentially pay for yourself for the rest of your life. It's pretty scary, and in all honesty, you need a good amount of money, or at least some foundational income like pensions and things like that, to be able to do that. if you are in your early 60s and you're trying to figure out, hey, can I retire now at 62 or 63 or 64, whatever it may be, really understanding how to withdraw your money in a way so it lasts is going to be probably the number one thing you need to be considerate of when it comes to not running out of money. Spending is the other side of it, but again, once you set your withdrawal percentages, then it's pretty easy to know how much you can spend. So saving, I think, is pretty easy. You put money in a 401k, you put money in an IRA, you max them out, and you put as much as you can. But taking distributions from these accounts in the most efficient way is another skill set completely. There's a lot more things to be thinking about when it comes to where to take the money from. If you only have one account and you work for one company and all you ever put money in was your 401k, you don't have taxable investments and you don't have a Roth account of any sort, well then you're only going to be able to pull from one account. So it's a little more simple, but again, you don't want to push yourself into the next tax bracket. Or as we discussed on our last training, you don't want, if you're taking Social Security, you don't want to be paying any provisional income if you can avoid it, right? Because that's just tax on your Social Security, and that's less money you get to take home and keep in your pockets. Okay, so not only do you need to be sure that you don't overdraw and risk running out of money, you may also want to make sure that you don't underdraw, right? So there's been a lot of talk lately that people are underdrawing. And because they underdrew, they're ending up with too much money when they pass on. And if you were to look back at the previous 20 or 30 years, in all honesty, they probably missed out on living life in retirement. And most of them did this because either they were too nervous and they just didn't take out enough money and didn't use their money as well as they could have, or they didn't have a proper strategy, right? They didn't know how much they can take and still be safe and have their best chances of not running out of money. Ideally, we don't want you to run out of money, but getting to your last days with a small amount, with the smallest amount possible, which means you got a chance to spend some money, enjoy retirement, do the things you wanted to do when you had the time to do it after you stopped working. You don't want to risk, underspending and missing out on those things either. So this is a really, really crucial subject. The other thing to be considerate of is you really want to avoid paying taxes on your withdrawal, right? The least amount of taxes you pay, the more money you get to keep, right? So tax efficient withdrawal strategies are very important, and it can easily be thousands of dollars a year that you get to keep and use for your purposes and not give to Uncle Sam and the government. So I think we're all on the same page where we think that's important. And let me move my little screen here so you can see this. I'm going to move myself just off to the side for a second here. Excuse me. Okay. And the other thing to be considerate of is, you want to be sure you're drawing from the right accounts in the right order. So what that means is if you have multiple types of accounts, so maybe you have tax-free accounts, or like a Roth account, taxable accounts, which would be just outside of a retirement account, right? Outside of a 401k or IRA. And then tax-deferred accounts, which would be a traditional IRA or 401k that you put money in there pre-tax. So, these three things are really important to get right when it comes to your overall withdrawal strategy. And it's just not as simple and clean as it is before retirement when you're contributing. Oh, okay, good. Okay, and then some other things to consider are, and we've talked about this in this group. Some of you may know what these are, some of you may not. We can dig into this later, but I'm going to show you the value of these today, actually. A good question is, should you do a Roth conversion, right? So should you move some of your money that was pre-tax because you were in your highest earning years and your highest tax paying years before retirement? Should you move some of that money, pay tax today once you retire and you're in a lower tax bracket, and then move that to a Roth account, which is a tax-free account, which again can grow tax-free forever. And you can also pass those down to your heirs and they can avoid paying taxes as well. Should you do a Roth conversion, right? These are some things you need to think about when it comes to your withdrawal strategy. If you haven't retired yet and you're still contributing, so you're still working, some things to think about are, where should you be contributing between now and retirement to set yourself up with the best situation for tax efficient withdrawals. So these are all things you need to be considering when it comes to retirement and retirement planning. And if you remember from last week's training, as I talked about, if you draw too much in 1 year from a tax deferred account, it could cause you to pay tax on your Social Security income if you go above the provisional income limits. So if you're new here this week, I did this training last week. It's under the announcements tab. You can find it there. And if you want to learn about how taxation on Social Security works, then you can go there. And that training is in excruciating detail, as some would say, which you should be looking for. Okay, so these are all things when it comes to withdrawing money that it's just a different mindset. It's a different way to think about the logic of where you're going to take money from. It's nowhere near as easy as contributing. Okay. But today, this is going to be our first installment in a series where we'll discuss creating sustainable income streams from your retirement funds. And we're going to talk about 4 different strategies in total to do so, okay? So the 4% rule, right? Who here has heard of the 4% rule? It's been talked about multiple times in the group, so I'm pretty confident that most of you have heard of that now. What is it really? It's like, and I'm going to talk about that actually. Let me get to that in a second. So most people have heard about it and doing the research, but if you haven't, here is the quick history of the 4% rule. So in the early 1990s, there was a gentleman named William Bengen. I'm not really sure how to pronounce that, but he used historical data and a 50-50 stock bond allocation. Bengen argued that just about all well-constructed portfolios, and well-constructed is actually really important, all well-constructed portfolios will be able to last throughout retirement. So for at least 30 years, if the initial withdrawal rate is set at 4% and the amount of subsequent withdrawals increases with inflation. So what does that mean? You take 4% the first year of whatever the amount is, and then you increase that amount by an inflation number. And that might be 2%, 3%. Again, that's going to be unique year to year, but that's where this number came from based on historical data. So sounds simple, right? Just do a 50-50 portfolio. But I would say not so fast. The first thing is, one of the problems is that 4% is not a lot of income for most folks. For every $100,000 that you have, 4% is going to generate you $4,000. And for every million that you have, 4% generates $40,000. So, some folks definitely here are in the millions in their savings and retirement accounts, but a lot of folks are not. So, if you're sitting there and you have a couple $100,000 in your account, let's say $200,000, and all you can take is $8,000 per year, that might not seem like a lot, right? So $8,000 per year divided by 12, what is that? Let's see, let me get my handy dandy calculator. 8,000. So that's a whopping $667 per month that you get to live off of if you have if you have $200,000 saved. So if you have $100,000 saved, and let's see, that is going to be $333. Wow. So you have $100,000 and you're only going to get to live off $333. That's not a lot of income for most people. Okay. So that's the first problem. And the second problem is for most people that have accumulated $1 million or more, there's a good chance that living off $40,000 would represent a lower standard of living than you're used to, right? So that's another big issue that you have to be concerned about, that you are now, technically you're a millionaire if you include home equity, right? So your net worth, your assets minus your liabilities equals your net worth. Technically, if including your house, if you have assets, including a house, minus anything you owe on any outstanding debts, equals $1 million or more, then you are a millionaire. Yay. But the most folks that I speak to that are millionaires, including their home equity, they don't feel super wealthy, right? And more over these years, $1 million is probably not going to be enough. We're talking, when you work with younger folks in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, they really need a lot more than $1 million to survive off of. But if you've accumulated $1 million, unless you started really early, in your early 20s or so, and you made average income, you can get to $1 million pretty easy. But, for a lot of folks, they started saving later, in life. And so the reality is you don't even have $1 million. But if you did, living off only $40,000 would probably be a lower standard of living that you're used to. So that's another problem with this. Okay, so since this initial research by Bengen, I've practiced saying it a couple times, I'm not sure what the best way is, but there's been additional research, okay, to show how high the initial safe withdrawal rate could be raised. So what was found is that there are many variables in play when determining the quote-unquote correct withdrawal rate for a particular client. Okay, so this is why I see some issues with this 4% withdrawal rate is, sure, it sounds good, but everybody's situation is different, okay? And getting the correct withdrawal rate may be higher or lower depending on what your needs are when it comes to your spending and also your potential longevity. If you're in your early 50s and you think 4% or 5% is going to be completely safe and you live to 95, that could be very, very risky and really increase the chance you can run out of money. So 4% and just sticking to that is not always the best strategy. So for example, you can possibly increase your safe withdrawal rate, and this is based on the research, right? This is not me telling you to do this, but if your portfolio is more diverse. So if you diversify your portfolio with more small cap and global securities, then your chance of increasing the amount you can withdraw from your portfolio is higher. But you're taking on additional risk, right, for that. So what does that mean? That means you're going to see more fluctuations potentially in your portfolio. And for all of you that were freaking out last week when you saw your portfolios drop 4%, 6%, whatever it may be, if you have, $1 million and you see your portfolio go down $60,000, a lot of folks freak out about that, right? So that's not always going to be feasible when it comes to your risk tolerance. So when you take into account risk tolerance, goals, your longevity expectations, increasing risk to increase withdrawal, that can add a little bit more stress and take away from your sound sleep at night. But by adding these to your portfolio, it has been shown that you can possibly increase the withdrawal rate. This is another really, really important point, okay, especially right now. The percentage also increases that you can potentially withdraw when the market is not at a high, and if the client can agree to decrease their withdrawals if there's a downturn in the market. So what do we know about right now? The market is pretty much at an all-time high, right? It's kind of toppling over and going back week to week, but we're pretty much at a market high, right? So if you look at the last 10 years, last 20 years, 30 years, we're at a market high. So if the market is not at a high, drawing a little bit more could be feasible. But what about right now? So what if the market goes down 20%, right? How is that going to affect your standard of living? Well, if you can agree to decrease your withdrawals if there's a downturn in the market, then you may be able to go a little higher than 4%. But you don't want to just do it haphazardly. You really want to look at, if you look at all the historical data, and you run the scenarios, what are the chances that you'll run out of money if you go a little bit higher for a few years, and then there's a downturn on top of it, so you're withdrawing too much and then the market goes down. Could add a lot of risk again to your retirement comfort. So but if you're not retiring yet and you have a few more years, and let's say the market takes a dip and it drops 10, 15, 20%, and then you go to retire and you have enough money, then taking a little bit higher percentage might be just fine because we expect the market to come back at some point. Do we know when? No, neither you or I or Nostradamus or Warren Buffett or anybody can predict the future. So please don't try to play that game with market timing. Just get your right allocation, stay invested, and withdraw accordingly, okay? But these are ways that you can potentially, if you're in these scenarios when you're retiring, potentially take a little bit more than 4% and still be just fine. Okay, so most recent research, though, it's really expected that the stock market's going to have lower returns over the next 10 or 20 years than it has the previous 10 and 20 years. But again, nobody knows. It's just what these, nerds, people that have PhDs and they're way smarter than me, this is what they say. But they're saying that they're placing safe withdrawal rates right now at 3 to 3.5%. And the big thing is citing longevity projections, okay? So we talk a lot about this in this group when it comes to delaying Social Security. And then inevitably there's going to be somebody that says, well, what if I die, right? What if I die? What if I don't get any Social Security because I die at 62, 63, 65, and I miss out on getting Social Security because I wanted to wait until full retirement age? That's possible, okay? That is possible. But in reality, 50% of people that make it to 65 are going to make it to the average age, which is 84 for men and 86 for women. It's like 86.6 and 84 point something. But what that means is 50% are going to live even longer, okay? So 50% are going to live to the average, but then 50% are going to live even longer. So I think it's like another 10% are going to live to, to 90, and then another 10% beyond that are going to live to 95. And then some of you are going to live past 100. We're going to be seeing people living to 100 very, very commonly over the next 10 to 20 years. There are so many medical advances that are in, testing right now, essentially, that are going to be coming out, that you're going to see people living to 115 and 120 in the next 10 or 20 years. Maybe you don't think you will, but longevity projections are increasing, and you passing away at 70 or 75 is just not as likely as it was 20 or 30 years ago, especially what we know about health, diets. And if you're not a smoker, you eat healthy, you exercise, there's a very good chance that you're going to live much beyond 80 or even 85. So that's one of the reasons they say to stick at 3 to 3.5%. So if you go to 1 million and you're going to draw at 3 to 3.5%, now we're talking $30,000 or $35,000 a year to live off of. That's just tight. You have $1 million sitting there, and you can live off 3 to 3.5%. Again, these are all things that need to be taken into consideration. The other thing is predictions of lower than historical stock market returns. A lot of these nerds are, and sorry for that term if you're one of the nerds out there, they're just so much smarter than me, and I really appreciate what they do. But they spend just thousands of hours crunching data to help us with these estimations. But we're expected to have lower than historical stock market returns. So there was a post in here, I think it was last week or the week before, and it was a Dave Ramsey article where he's talking about 12% returns, right? Don't get me wrong. I actually really appreciate Dave, and I appreciate the things he does. I've met him in person. I have a picture of me standing next to him, shaking his hand, because I've volunteered at his events before. He helps a lot of people. His baby step 1, 2, and 3 when it comes to getting out of debt and saving an emergency fund are excellent. But his investment advice is extremely risky if you're going to rely on it for your retirement income. I've read in his material that he's, based on 12% average returns, you should be able to withdraw 8% from your portfolio in retirement, have 4% to keep up with inflation, and you should be just fine. When you actually run the numbers, there's like a 95 or 98% chance that you're going to run out of money if you draw at 8%, okay? So you got to be really, really careful when it comes to your withdrawal rate and what you're expecting to earn from your investment accounts, especially if you're not going to go 100% stock portfolio where you can face a 30 or 40% drawdown pretty commonly, over 10 or 20 years, in the next 10 or 20 years, we should say. So, and then add to that the current low interest rate environment. The great news is we are increasing interest rates. I say that's great and bad, right? So if you have fixed income portions of your portfolio, you're probably going to see a short-term drop in the value there because you'll have bonds that are, again, they're going to have durations that are, now you're going to get paid 2 or 3%, where going forward 3.5%, 4% is going to be pretty common over these next couple of years. But we're still in currently a very low interest rate environment compared to the 80s. I was talking to one of my clients the other day, and they were telling me about the 80s where, you can get guaranteed bond returns at 15%, 16%. Of course, home mortgages were at 18, 19, or 20%, right? But having a guaranteed 15% income, I think most of us would be really happy about that. But on the other side, trying to buy a house or anything like that would be a little bit ridiculous at this point. But we're still in very, very low interest rate times. They are raising. But again, the guaranteed returns, if you were to invest in something like a bond portfolio or even single bonds and do a bond ladder for the first, say, 10 years of retirement, getting a high interest rate is going to be really tough. So these are all things that need to be taken into account when you are planning for your withdrawal strategy. Okay, so regardless of what withdrawal percentage is used, most researchers and advisors agree that a set it and forget it strategy doesn't work. Okay, so just saying, I'm going to take 4% and just setting it and forgetting it, it's not is not a good idea. Okay. I think it's a good starting place, and it's a good place for you to say, okay, well, if I were to draw 4% from my retirement accounts, would I be comfortable, right? Would I be able to do the things I want to do in retirement? Will my chances of running out of money be very, very minimal? And I think it's a good place to start. But like I mentioned in the previous slide, and it says here, this doesn't allow for any flexibility for changes in spending throughout retirement. And I'm going to get to some of the questions that you asked, but there were many questions that said, hey, well, what if I want to spend 5% or whatever it may be the first 3 years and 4 years? Can I then drop that to 3 and have everything work out okay, right? So we're going to talk about that. But the real thing you need to know is that you need to have flexibility in your spending plan. So I recommend that you revisit your spending plan, and hopefully you're doing it with a professional. Okay, you know, I'm here to help you out. This group is great, but whether you use me or someone else, I recommend you work with a professional to really get this figured out each year and invest in yourself to get the knowledge to make sure that you are on track to not run out of money. But each year you should be looking at the amount you withdraw, and maybe you can go high, you know, because you had a really good year in the market. But on the opposite, again, we're at market highs. So expecting a dip in the market, you know, of 10 to 14% is not unreasonable over the next couple years, you know? So if your assets drop 10 or 14%, well, then you may have to adjust your withdrawal percentage. So revisiting this on a regular basis, maybe twice a year, at least once a year, to make sure that you are on track and that you're not leaving money on the table that you could spend if you have a really good year, for example. Because I really think it's important to, on the good years, draw a little bit extra, set it aside, and do things that you really enjoy because you saved and invested for year after year to be at this point. I think it's important to do those things. And many of my clients, in all honesty, like they're just so frugal, and that's how they ended up saving as much money as they did. And a lot of them have sat in cash since 2008 before they met me and really understood how to put a portfolio together. And so they just sat on cash all these years, and they see their portfolios going down every month when they're withdrawing, and it makes them freak out, right? So that's not good either, you know. So we got to find the happy medium that allows for flexibility for changes in spending throughout retirement. And as a general statistic, and this is my experience too, and maybe some of you agree, some of you disagree, but I think most people tend to spend more in the first 5 to 7 years of retirement, but later in retirement, things like travel expenses decrease, right? But on the other side of it, healthcare expenses most certainly will increase because over time, you know, it's just how it is. So there's two sides to this, okay? So yes, I want you to enjoy your first years in retirement, but when you look at longevity, so when I say longevity, I mean the chance of you outliving your spending, right? Based on basically you live longer than your money will last. If you spend too much early in retirement, that can put a stress on the back end of retirement. When you're 80, 85, 90, when you really can't go to work anymore and you don't have options to do different things, if you overspend in the first 5 to 7 years, that can really put stress on the back end. If you add to that higher spending plus the market decides to go down 10, 15, 20% and your assets decrease and you continue spending the same way because you set your percentage, let's say at 4%, for example, not good. You know, you have to be really careful and make sure you're managing this on, you know, at least on an annual basis, right? So a lot of you folks in here are DIY or do-it-yourselfers. That's okay. And that's great. You know, a lot of you want to save the cost, but the way I see it, it's definitely an investment in yourself to get the help you need on a regular basis and make sure that you're on track, you know, for a healthy retirement. I'm going to take a quick break here, see if there's any questions that popped up. I'm not seeing any yet. Okay, good. So again, you know, first 5 to 7 years of retirement, probably going to be higher spending, more travel, visiting the family, you know, doing hobbies. In all honesty, you're just going to be bored because you're used to going to work 50, 60 hours a week probably, or 40 hours a week at least. And now you have all this free time and this free schedule, and it's amazing. But it's pretty easy just to go out and spend and, you know, go shopping randomly or just be places and just spend money just out of, you know, boredom, honestly. So really got to watch these things the first 5 to 7 years because it does add a lot of stress on the back end of your retirement success. Okay. Also, a fixed percentage also doesn't account for current investment experience, right? So by just staying at a fixed percentage today, things could change over this next couple of years. We have a wild time right now. We have, crazy things going on in the White House. We have crazy tariffs going on against countries like China that are messing with stuff. We have healthcare changes that are potentially coming. There's a lot of things going on right now, and we have the highest market we've had in a really long time. Yeah, it drew down a little bit, but still we have a very high market. So there's a lot of things we have to really look at before we land on a good withdrawal rate. And on top of that, flat rate withdrawals that ignore dramatic market changes, especially in the early years of retirement, can lead to you depleting your portfolio too early. So I just talked about that a second ago. If you overdraw too early, this really puts a risk on the back end of retirement. So just staying at a fixed percentage can really put some stress on that. Okay, and then on the other side, again, I mentioned this as well, but if market earnings are higher than expected and you just continue with your flat percentage withdrawal, then you're essentially leaving money on the table and you're missing out on life experiences. So we don't want that either, right? We want to find the balance between enjoying life, making sure we're having a lot of fun, doing all the things we want to do, but then not, leaving money on the table or running out of money too early. So it's a dynamic process is what I'm trying to say. It's not a fixed process. So what is the bottom line here? Okay. So in order to have the best chance of keeping up with inflation and maintaining your lifestyle, it is essential for retirees to monitor and adapt their withdrawal rate over time due to changing market conditions, personal needs. Simple. I mean, that's a long way to say that you need to really manage this on a regular basis, right? It's just really important that you do this on a regular basis, that you don't just stick with one percentage, stay flat, and then just hope it all works out. Not a good idea. Okay, in my eyes, there's just no such thing as set it and forget it. You need to pay attention to these things and be on top of them. And if you can't do it yourself, get the help that you need. 4%, it's a good rule as a guide. There's nothing necessarily wrong with it, but as we've seen here, it's not a perfect solution by any means. Okay, figuring out how much you need to withdraw from your accounts on an annual basis to cover basic living expenses and then making adjustments yearly to increase or decrease additional spending is a very smart way to stay ahead of running out of money. And if you have a unique scenario like early retirement, you will definitely want to run multiple scenarios on withdrawal percentages and see what the risk/longevity outcomes could look like in different markets. I think that's really, really important to do. Okay. Before we get to next time, I want to show you something here. Okay. I have hopefully you can see this okay. I have a scenario that I've mapped out for, this is just a general test client, right? So a couple things I want to show you here. So here's potential for a client of what their income and withdrawal percentages would look like. And the set time of retirement is 65 years old right here, okay? So if this person just did their normal strategy and withdrew from their retirement accounts, this is sort of what their income would look like over the years. But here's what I want to show you as an example. So here's an example of this person. So in this case, this particular client wanted to do like an early retirement, right? So in their case, they wanted to take a retirement, like early retirement with them and their spouse. They were 50 and 48 to start until 53 and 51. So they're going to take a few years off. So with their withdrawal strategy, their plan was to actually go back to work after, but they wanted to do a mini retirement, right? So mini retirements are becoming more and more popular, especially if you've done really well early on and you have a good savings in your account. So in this case, again, this is just an example, guys. Like, please don't trash me for this because maybe you're not here and that's okay. That's not the point. But this particular couple had about $400,000 saved in their tax-deferred accounts, like 401ks and IRAs, another $80K saved in their taxable account. So they saved really early and they saved a lot of money. So what they wanted to do was actually take a few years off, not contribute to continue contributing, and they had to withdraw down a little bit. So in their case, it looked great for them to draw a little bit here, and then from 54 and 52 until they were going to go back to work because they had a plan to go back and work in their business, all the way until 67 and 69, then they were going to continue working and contributing and then not withdraw anything. So then from what they did here is take out this amount of money. So this is about 60,000 or so over 4 years. They didn't take anything from their tax deferred account. They didn't have a tax-free account at this point. They just had taxable and tax deferred. And so if you see their income from their tax deferred account, they didn't touch it at all until they're 70. So that's the plan for this particular one. And this is what, again, this is estimations that they would need to stay within a certain tax bracket, okay? So what we can do as well is put in other strategies. So since these folks were going to have a gap in their working years and earning years, we can look at something that's called a Roth conversion. So what we can do is map out what that would look like if they were to do a Roth conversion. And so in these gap years here, I know it's kind of hard to see because this thing's overlaying, but this is meant to show you the tax brackets. But if you look at the purple here, this is the gap years, okay? So this is between when they would take a break and then have some years of no income that we would have an opportunity to do Roth conversions. So when their income drops off here, you can see the green area would be their adjusted taxable income, AGI, without conversion. It's the same in each year. But once they leave work, they don't have any income. Well, what they expect the tax bracket to be for 12 or 15% is that they can convert up to $123,000 from their pre-tax money into a Roth account. So when I was mentioning Roth conversions, when you don't have Social Security coming in and you don't have any income in these gap years, this is a great time to really be doing some Roth conversions. So here they can move $120,000 over and stay in the 12% tax bracket. The next year they move $123,000, and then the following year they move $126,000. And by doing this strategy, they actually end up with $117,000 more dollars in their retirement portfolio by taking advantage of Roth conversions. So where they end up is in a whole lot better place where they have a lot more money in tax-free accounts. So down the road, they're going to have some options there. Okay. So when we work it out for clients, we actually look at, okay, what are some good times to do Roth conversions during these low-income earning years? And then what is that going to look like? And we'll map out a detailed kind of year-by-year strategy, right, on where we're going to take money from, what that's going to look like, and everything like that. So I don't know if this is hard to see. It's the first time I've really tried to do this on a training for you guys, so I would love your feedback on this. So if this is helpful for me to show you an example of what it would look like to do these strategies in these years, I would definitely like to know. Leave me a comment down below. But there's different things to think about when it comes to what percentages you're going to take over each year. And then there's other strategies to look at, like Roth conversions and different things like that, where maybe you take a higher percentage and convert it, but then later you have a lot more money that you get to use because of the strategies you did earlier in retirement, okay? So that's pretty much what I have for you today as far as the training. Next time, we're gonna talk about bucket strategies. So what bucket strategies are about setting up different asset buckets for different periods of retirement, okay? So we'll talk about that next time. It's probably gonna be a couple weeks out because I am leaving. I'm gonna try to get it done if I can, but it won't be a live training. It'll be, when I record ahead of time, but maybe we'll wait till I get back to do that. We'll see. Okay, so if you need help, and if this is something that's on your mind, as always, I'm available. I do complimentary strategy calls for you guys. I'm only gonna be able to take on a couple clients towards the end of the year because I'm gone for 2 weeks, then I have other client work. So if you want to get help with this, and maybe this is a year you need to move some money, or you're thinking about taking money out and you want to do it before the tax year ends to make sure you're on track, then definitely schedule an appointment. But what I want to do now is start answering some of your questions. And if you have other questions about anything that I talked about today, go ahead and put them in the comments here, and I'll get to them in a second. So I'm going to jump back to the other live I did earlier to let you guys know and get to some of those comments there. Okay, let's see here. Give me 1 second to get to that. Okay, so I found it. All right, so Joni asks, is it okay to average 4%? Say the first couple years you need 5%, and then after turning 65 or for retirement age, you take 3% for a couple years to try to make it up, right? So I think we talked about this. I think that's definitely a great way to be thinking about it, Joni. I think that's really smart that you can start somewhere and then make adjustments over the next couple years based on spending and based on what you want to do for the first few years. What I would recommend in addition is that you not only look at it for these, say, first few years, right? What we're talking about here in your question is the first 5 to 7 years. I want you to run some scenarios. Run some scenarios like I've shown you here, and whether you do it yourself, and I don't know if there's software available, honestly, that's free somewhere, or you work with a professional like myself that has the software we need that we can map out different scenarios for you to show you what that would look like. You want to map that out 10, 15, or 20 years so that you can see how it's going to look like on the back end if you were to take a little bit more the first couple years and then drop the percentage for a couple years and then go back up over time. So I think you're thinking about it the right way. I would just say add to that to look at it over longer periods, not just the first couple years, okay? Good question, though. Tia asks, if one needs to take a lump sum distribution during retirement, like for a vacation or car, is it smart to take lump sum distributions from an IRA account? Okay, so another great question, right? I love this group, man. This group, like, you guys are just like so. I mean, I'm happy I can teach you some things here, but this is just such good stuff to be talking about because I think a lot of people have the same questions. So, is it smart to take lump sum distributions from your IRA? So, the question is in relation to what, right? So, if you have other accounts like taxable accounts or Roth IRA accounts, well, then the question gets a lot more complicated. If you have a taxable account, so let's just say you have money saved in your bank account or just like in some investments that are outside of your IRA, most likely it's going to make more sense to draw from your taxable accounts or the cash in your IRA than it is going to be to draw from the IRA. Why is that? Because the IRA money is tax deferred, right? So if the money's in there and it can keep growing tax deferred, usually that's going to work out better than if you have money in a taxable account where you will have to pay, say, capital gains taxes on any growth that you have, but you're not going to have to pay your full tax rate. So, taxable accounts are tax advantaged where you don't pay more than capital gains rates on them. So that's nice. So generally, it's better to take it from your taxable accounts if you can first. But if you're going to take it from your IRA, some things to be thinking about are try to avoid pushing yourself into the next tax bracket. So let's say now you're in the 12% tax bracket and you're going to be below $77,400, which I think is a number for this year for 2018, that keeps you in the 12% tax bracket for a married couple. Well, if you're going to take out money from your IRA and now you're going to go to like the 22% tax bracket or the 25% tax bracket, well, maybe that doesn't make sense, right? Because you're going to pay a lot more money to take that money out at the end of the year. It's going to cost you 25% of that money potentially to keep it. So that might not be a good idea. So that's how I would look at it. I would need to know more detail to really get into the analysis, but looking at both sides of the equation like that, I think are the way to do it. Okay. All right. Janet asks, what type of investment mix, for example, stock, bonds, and other, do I need to apply the 4% rule safely? So the 4% rule is based on a 50-50 mix, right? Stock and bond funds. That the specifics of those would fall into the investment advice category, and I can't give specific investment advice because I would need to know more about your situation and your comfort with international, small cap, and all that other good stuff. So also with the U.S. stock market being at a high valuation, just 4% rule makes sense. So Janet, you're a very smart lady. Let me tell you, this was addressed in the training, obviously, but this 4% rule is actually a lot more dangerous if the market is at all-time highs, like we talked about earlier, which it is right now. So right now, it might be a little more risky to take 4% or 5% than it would be, say, if the market was down and now you start withdrawing. Then she asks, is the 4% against your original amount, or do you do the 4% against what you have at the end of each year? So that's a good question. So I think 4% of the overall portfolio to start your first year, and then each year you would increase that with an inflation adjustment. Okay, so maybe it's 2-3%, something like that, of additional money that you pull out on the second year from the first year. So hopefully that makes sense. So I'm going to make the numbers easy just so I can do them inside my head right now. But let's say the first year you're going to pull out $100,000, right? And that's 4% of your retirement portfolio. Well, if you increase that by a 3% inflation adjustment, then that's going to be $103,000 the next year, right? That's so it's based on your starting amount. I think that's what you're asking. But to go back to what I was talking about in the training, if you had a really good year and instead of earning 6, 7, or 8%, you earned 12 or 15%, Well, now we can discuss taking 4% of the larger amount possibly, or just a little bit higher withdrawal because you had a really good year. So really good question. Okay, then her questions continue here. So other questions. If you need more money in retirement, so she's 60 and will need to pay for her own health care and don't plan to take Social Security until she's 70, is it okay to take 5% for the first 10 years and then drop down to 3% from then on, since my expenses will be less once Medicare kicks in, and also have a substantial Social Security income starting age 70, right? So I think I wouldn't base it on percentages necessarily at that point. I would base it on the dollar amount you need to cover your expenses, right? So maybe you need a higher dollar amount the first couple years. So if that happens to be 5% or maybe it's 6%, that's secondary. But I would base it on the dollar amount you need to cover your expenses these first few years, and to cover, healthcare and things like that until you hit Social Security. And then based on what your Social Security expectation is at 70, if the amount you adjust it to, the dollar amount you need to then live off of, then goes down, and then that number on the next 20 or 30 years of retirement is a reasonable number, and you don't have to worry about running out of money, then I think that's the way I would look at it. So if that percentage ends up being 2 or 3%, that's all fine and dandy. But I would look at that on a hard dollar judgment. I look at the actual dollars taken to see what you would need. Okay, I don't think, again, this goes back to what I'm talking about today. If you don't want to stick to a flat percentage. You really want to look at what you need on a dynamic basis, so a year-to-year basis on what your costs are. Okay, so great questions. So really, really good questions. And then Dan asks, looking to draw about $60K per year. If I'm correct, I need $1.5 million. If you're looking at a 4% withdrawal rate, static, yes. 4% of $1.5 million is $60,000 a year. Does it mean that you need $1.5 million to draw $60,000 a year? Maybe yes, maybe no. If based on your risk tolerance and your portfolio's expected returns, you can only draw 3%, right? Then you actually need $2 million to draw $60,000 a year, right? But if based on your risk tolerance and you're willing to go a little bit higher on the risk factor and be willing to adjust your need for income if the market does drop, well, maybe you can do a little bit higher withdrawal if you have 1.2 or a million, and take a little bit higher for a few years with the expectation that you will draw less later. So again, this is a dynamic calculation. It's not static. I highly recommend you don't just stick at a flat rate every year. You want to look at this on a year-to-year basis. Okay, but good question. Brian's 8 years into retirement, and his annual withdrawal rate has remained fairly flat each year between 3.14 and 3.59. So again, it's not flat though. That's still dynamic, right? So this is the range you may need to be in, like 3.15 to 3.6, or maybe 3.6 to 4. This is all really, really important, especially when you're dealing with large numbers. Like if you have $1 million, multi-million-dollar portfolios, like every 0.5% could be $5,000 or $10,000. So it makes a huge difference in what your monthly spending ability will be, right? But in his case, him and his wife, I'm assuming, both plan to buy cars in the next year, and they're going to blow past the 4% rule for just 1 year, and we'll see how this fuzzy plan goes, right? So Brian, I recommend you don't have a fuzzy plan. I recommend that you actually look at the implications, that if you go higher for a few years, and based on posts I've seen of yours, you're probably going to be fine. But you want to make sure that if you go higher and you spend and you buy some really nice cars, that it's not going to sacrifice your later years in retirement or sacrifice other funds you have set aside for other things like long-term care, health insurance, things like that. You want to get really, really tight on that. Kathy asked, what age should you begin the 4% rule? I'm sure it matters how much invested. Well, yes, I do think that's important, but the age question is good because the original research was really done for people that are 65, right? With a 30-year expectation of lifespan. So 65 to 95, if you withdraw 4% per year at a 50-50 stock bond portfolio, the research historically, right? And this is going backwards. So as we know, and on every investment statement you probably have, past returns are not indicative of future returns, right? There's no guarantees going forward. So, you want to look at this on a year-to-year basis, but it's based on 65 years old that you'll have a 30-year portfolio without too much to worry about. and not worrying about running out of money. So really good question. But yes, it does matter how much money you have as well, of course. If you have $5 million, it's a whole different story than if you have, $200,000. So great questions. Let me jump over to the other post here and see if there's any other questions that have popped up since our discussion. Okay. Brian says nerds. Yes, Brian, I'm a nerd and at a certain level, but there's like next level nerd that is like these geniuses that they can't even really communicate with people effectively. They just stay in their PhD research and give us all the data. I love them, but yeah, I'm sorry if I offended you. I didn't mean to offend you. Nothing intentional. Please don't take that harshly. Let's see. So Mary Lou says, what happens at 70 and a half? Again, 70 and a half, you have to take money out of your traditional IRAs or 401ks if you're not working, right? Traditional IRAs doesn't matter, you have to take money out. But then you have your RMD. So your RMD is generally not going to be 4%. It starts off a lot lower than that. I think it's like 2.4 or something like that. But that 4% is, again, relative. But at 70 and a half, you have to start withdrawing. So regardless, you're going to have to take a certain percentage. And then from there, you want to make sure your income needs are met. So I think that is a little bit of a different question. Kevin asks, if I leave my long-term employer at 55, can I begin to convert my 401k to Roth immediately? So yeah, technically you can. You probably follow the steps of converting a certain amount, right? You probably don't want to convert the whole thing because you're going to totally blow your tax brackets out of proportion. But yeah, if you leave, you can convert some of that money over from 401k to an IRA, then to a Roth IRA potentially. But again, you really want to look at, does it make sense? You want to look at, does it make sense to do that? And a lot of times it doesn't make sense, right? It makes more sense to keep your money tax deferred, especially if your tax bracket's going to be really low for a while, because at 55, you're not going to be taking Social Security for maybe a decade, maybe 15 years. So if you don't have any other income and your tax brackets are really low, then it may not make sense to convert the money. It may make sense just to keep it in, just take, tax deferred withdrawals. Again, it's a case-by-case basis, but you want to look at your situation in particular. Let's see. Okay, there's some other things in there. Yeah, so Jim talked about Roth conversions in a high market versus a lower. So that's a good question. Something changed this year in Roth conversion. So previous to this year, we used to be able to do what's called recharacterization. So what that means is if you move money from a traditional IRA to a Roth IRA, and then the value of those funds dropped, right? So if you moved, let's say, $5,000 from your traditional to your Roth, and then that value drops, so now it's only $4,000. Essentially, you're missing out on money that could be, tax-free, because now you have an extra amount of money each year to fill up that $5,000 bucket, for example. Well, previously you could recharacterize and you can move that money back from your Roth IRA back to a traditional if the market was down, and then essentially you're moving more shares, right, of your funds over since the market's down, and then you can move it back to a Roth again and redo that later in the year if the market were to go down. Now you can't do that anymore. It's kind of a one and done type deal. And so for clients, I'm recommending that you actually wait till later in this year, generally November, mid-December, to do your conversions. If it goes down the last couple weeks of the year, it is what it is, right? But if you convert early in January and then the market goes down, then you lose out on some of that tax-free space, essentially, because you're moving over less shares of your funds to do that. So to go back to Jim's question, since the market is high, right? The market is high technically. There is, more of a chance of it dropping 10 or 15% than it increasing 10 or 15%. So, in this case, at this time of the year, you might really want to pay attention and really think about when your timing is on moving to do the Roth conversion. So really good question, though. So Michelle asked, so am I saying Roth conversion is not always the way to go? Absolutely. Roth conversions are not always the way to go. There's so much talk about Roth accounts and how they're the best thing of all time, and that's all good and dandy, right? But it's not always the best thing. In fact, if when you put money into your Roth account if your tax rate is the same before retirement as it's going to be after, you're actually going to net the same amount of dollars. So it really doesn't benefit you at all to put money in a Roth account. But Roth accounts have other advantages, especially like you're able to take out your contributions at any time, technically, right? So if you are retiring really early and you're putting money in at 20, 30, and 40 years old, you want to take money out at 52, you can take out contributions to your Roth account at any time. So there are advantages, but most people are going to be in a higher tax bracket before they retire. And right before they retire, they're probably in the highest tax bracket they're ever going to be. So keeping their money tax-free, or tax deferred, and then withdrawing it and paying taxes on it, especially if you only need a small amount of income from your accounts, it might be better just to keep the money in a traditional account and not actually do the conversion. So that's why when I was showing you over here, for this particular client, it made sense, right? It made sense for them to, to do the Roth conversions in this little window that they had here. But if their tax bracket in retirement was going to be, let's say, 25%, well, still makes some sense, right? But you really have to look at that. But if they're going to have to fill up a 22 or 25% tax bracket to make it happen, and their tax bracket's the same, good. But if their tax bracket is lower in retirement, then maybe it doesn't make as much sense to convert as much money. So these are all things that really need to be, again, I recommend you pay somebody, whether it's me, whether it's somebody else. I highly recommend you work with a professional that can help you map out these strategies. It might cost you a few $1,000s, okay? But getting this advice and paying a little bit of money up front. I had a client I was working with last week, 2 weeks ago actually, and we actually found her an additional $700,000 of retirement income by considering Roth conversions, considering delaying Social Security, and doing different timing on when we're going to take the money in what order. And she had a larger portfolio, but we found potentially an additional $700,000 of retirement income if she lived till 90 or 92, right? So there's so many things you want to look at. Just doing this on the fly is not the best way to be thinking about this, okay? So I think we've gone long enough today. We went over an hour, guys. This is why I wanted to break this training up into multiple sections. But thank you so much for your questions. Thank you so much for attending today. If you need anything at all, reach out, schedule an appointment. It is complimentary for your first call, and we'll go from there, okay? If you guys are watching this later, you have additional questions, put them in the comments. I'll do my best to go in there and answer them as I can, all right? Other than that, have a great day, and I will see you guys probably in a couple weeks. And for those of you that did wish me a great vacation, I appreciate that. Dang, I just lost who it was because I dropped my phone. But I really appreciate you saying that, and I will see you guys very, very soon, all right? Bye-bye now.